Those that might have water hemp might consider Zidua, as Zidua is a pretty important product for that weed, water hemp. But that three-way mix is something you should strongly consider. And then of course, post-emergence, you could come back with the dicamba. We've got Enlist, Liberty, Flexstar, Ultra Blazer, Basagran. With Flexstar and Ultra Blazer, definitely want to target weeds less than 3 inches, and Basagran want to target kochia that's 1 inch. Okay, so these are our soil applied herbicides that we have then: dicamba, Spartan, metribuzin, Valor products, Zidua or Anthem Flex products, and then our yellow products, Treflan, Sonalan, Prowl. So we've got different modes of action there. Usually want to combine at least 2 modes of action, if not 3. Post-emergence, of course, again, dicamba, Liberty, the Group 14's Flexstar, Ultra Blazer, and Basagran. So just real quick, some data here from a couple years ago. The blue bar here is the soil applied herbicide used by itself. So we've got Warrant metribuzin by itself, Warrant alone, Fierce, Valor, Authority MTZ alone. But the orange bar is where we used the soil applied herbicide in combination with Extendamax. All these treatments were applied pre. And you can see that, okay, this spring, particular spring was a little bit drier. So our soil applied herbicides didn't work real well. But having the Extendamax there on the soil surface really helped. You can see that we controlled kochia very well with all these treatments that contain Extendamax. So even Extendamax by itself looked very good. Now, Joe Eichley conducted this same study in Fargo, and he saw the same trend. Now, the level of control of kochia wasn't as good, but still the effect or the benefit of the Extendamax applied pre can clearly be seen here, with the orange bars very much providing better control than the soil applied herbicide alone. Looking at some other weeds, this is lamb's quarters. Again, not great control from the soil applied herbicides in general. Maybe Warrant metribuzin looking pretty good here. Authority MTZ looking pretty good here. But Warrant alone, Fierce, and Valor not looking great on lamb's quarters, but you throw in the Extendamax and we get very good control. This one surprised me. This is yellow foxtail. None of these treatments provided good control. None of the soil applied herbicides provided good control of yellow foxtail. And I wouldn't have expected dicamba to provide this much yellow foxtail control. But where we had the soil applied herbicide in combination with the Extendamax pre, it looked pretty good. Now notice Extendamax by itself didn't look that great. This was really interesting, and I definitely noted when I rated this that this was certainly consistent across reps, that the Extendamax alone did not look that good, but in combination looked very good. Now, this was done in 2023. When we repeated this in 2024, we did not see this level of yellow foxtail control. And here's what I think happened. In 2023, we had drier conditions. That dicamba, the Extendamax, I believe, because we had drier conditions, sat on the soil surface. Whereas in 2024, we had very wet conditions. And I believe that dicamba, being very water soluble, moved out of the seed zone, which I think it contributed to the poorer control of yellow foxtail the following year. Okay, this next trial I'm going to discuss is from Joe Eichley. It doesn't revolve around kochia. It is actually a water hemp study that he conducted from 21 through 23. And this was, but the same principle as the study I just described. We had pre-herbicides applied alone, and then with and without a half a pound of dicamba. So just like the previous study I showed you. Now, in all years, there was less than a half inch of rainfall within 14 days after application. So again, drier conditions. So in a similar fashion, he had these same treatments, Warrant plus Metribuzin, Valor, Fierce, and Authority MTZ applied alone. And now again, this is water hemp control, and so not great control with the soil applied herbicide by itself. But where we added Extendamax to the mix, we got greater than 90% water hemp control 35 to 42 days after planting. So again, here's the benefit of that pre-applied dicamba. Okay, you've heard this message before, but I'm going to reiterate it. We shouldn't be guessing with the kochia and water hemp that we're dealing with. We have the ability to test for resistance. I'm thinking particularly here for group 14 resistant kochia and group 14 resistant water hemp. There are envelopes, these little coin envelopes, which then you would put in this envelope. They are at every extension office, and what you're going to do is you're going to take 2 or 3 leaves of kochia or water hemp and place in this coin envelope. You'll have 4 of them in one single larger mailing envelope, and you'll put them in. You'll sample, say, 4 different fields and send them in for testing. Within a week, you'll have results and know if the kochia or water hemp you're dealing with is group 14 resistant or not. So let's not guess. Let's take advantage of this technology, and might save us some money by not spraying some herbicides that aren't going to do any good. Okay, I've been pushing this all winter, and I believe it's for good reason. We do not want water hemp in the western part of the state. In our minor crops, we just don't have the herbicide options to deal with it. We have found water hemp in these counties. We found it in 3 places in Ward County, but McHenry, Sheridan, Pierce, and Wells, there's some significant infestations in those counties. And we have to take the approach of early detection, rapid response. We need to, in August and September, when these plants really start growing above the canopy, we've got to be looking for them. And when we find them, we need to pull them. Do not combine through them, or your fields are going to look like they do in the Red River Valley, with just hundreds of thousands of water hemp plants covering some of these fields. So water hemp, this is Joe Eichley's water hemp distribution as far west as Ward County. Now the group 14 resistance in water hemp is a little bit different than what we see in kochia. With kochia, we see resistance to Sharpen, AIM, Vita, and Reviton, and then the foliar resistance. Then we see some resistance to Valor and varied resistance to Spartan. But with the group 14 resistant water hemp, we see strong resistance to Flexstar, Ultra Blazer, and Cobra. We don't see that in kochia, but we definitely do see that in water hemp. And then we see reduced sensitivity to Spartan, Valor, Sharpen, and AIM. So we know this looks like it's in the eastern part of the state. Probably just a matter of time before we get it in the West, but just keep that in mind. And especially if you're using Flexstar in soybeans or Reflex in dry beans, this could be an issue. Okay, the reason we're so concerned about water hemp is because it's prone to resistance. You've probably seen this slide before, but we've got, this is Iowa State, showed the years when water hemp was shown to be resistant to all of these groups. And then in individual plants were resistant to as many as 6 different modes of action. This is a big deal. And then, yes, the answer to this question, resistant to Liberty yet? Yes, unfortunately, that is the case. We've seen Liberty-resistant water hemp identified in at least 3 states, and I'm told suspected in 3 more. It's also Liberty resistance in Palmer amaranth in a couple of states. This is a picture of water hemp in soybeans in eastern North Dakota. Another shot of another field where there's just thousands of plants. And you really don't want to let it get to this level. You know, these individual plants look kind of innocent, but if each one of them are producing hundreds of thousands of seeds, then you can have a mess in just 1 year or 2 years. Look at this one in Ward County. This is a low spot. And in this low spot, it's basically out competing the cattails. And it's just a solid mess in there. This tells me that this water hemp probably wasn't in there for just 1 year. It's probably been there for at least 2 or 3 years. And I'm nervous about looking out here this spring in this wheat field to see how far it's spread over there into the field. This is a picture from Fargo. Shows you how thick this water hemp can be as it produces hundreds of thousands of seeds. And then how are we going to control this on our minor crops, where we've got very few, if any, post-emergence options. Joe Eichley took this picture. He said this plant emerged September 1st. This is one of the challenges with water hemp, is it emerges throughout the year. It doesn't just emerge in May and June. He said this plant emerged around September 1st. In 3 weeks, it grew to be about 3 inches and then produced, he pulled out about 100 seeds out of that plant. So in just 3 weeks, that plant went to seed in September. That's going to be a challenge for us. So this August and September, be looking for plants that are standing above the canopy, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet tall. Looks like a pigweed, but water hemp has no hair, and it has narrow, shiny leaves. That's what you're going to be looking for. Whereas redroot pigweed is very hairy. It's a dull green color, very rough to the touch. So be looking for these narrow leaves with no hair. Okay, this is the distribution of Palmer. And I show this because of the 18 counties where we have found Palmer, there's only about 3 or 4 where Palmer is still found. And that's because we put it on the noxious weed list. When we found these, the Palmer in these counties, they were immediately removed. They weren't combined. And now we've taken this down from about 18 counties down to 3 or 4. And so we need to take the same approach with water hemp. Don't let these things get started. Be vigilant, look for them, and remove them. Okay, moving on to kochia. Joe Eichley has, you may have seen Joe present this, but this is very concerning data here, where they collected 100 samples from across the state. This is kochia. 100 samples from across the state. The first 60 they tested, 35 of 60 were PPO resistant, or group 14 resistant. 60 out of 60 were glyphosate resistant. 12 out of 60 were resistant to dicamba. The dicamba half a pound rate. This is the XtendiMax rate. This is concerning if 1 out of 5 kochia samples are resistant to dicamba. That's going to be a challenge for us. Then the next 40 that they tested were also had about half were group 14 resistant. So out of the 93 they've tested so far, 53% have been group 14 resistant. That's a concern. And that's why I say we really need to be sending in those envelopes so that we know what we're dealing with. We're not the only ones dealing with this. Montana to the west of us, South Dakota to the south of us, and Canada to the north of us. Here's the map of Canada and the red counties where group 14 resistance has been found in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Okay, just real quick, one other tool that we found that can be useful for us in helping to control kochia. If we need to make use of the soil applied herbicides we have, the group 3s like Sonalan and Prowl. They're not the greatest, but they are suppression. We need to make use of metribuzin, especially in soybean. Soybean is very tolerant to metribuzin. Really should be using metribuzin. Use Spartan because not all of the kochia is resistant to Spartan. We've got the other herbicides to help the Spartan, but this is another one that could help us if needed. Obviously, the Anthem Flex and Zidua are group 15. It's a different mode of action. And these two herbicides both contain pyroxasulfone, and they are very non-water soluble. So in the spring, they really need a good inch of rain to get activated. And that's why they work better actually in the fall, because we don't usually get that timely activating rain in the spring. The rate where we've actually been seeing decent control is this 4-ounce rate of Zidua, which is equivalent to 4.5 of Anthem Flex. And as I looked at our data from across the state with Kirk Howitt and Caleb Daly, the range of control of kochia wild oat and bromes, this would be downy brome, Japanese brome, is 60 to 90%. So that's pretty good suppression, and almost you could call it good control in some cases. And so this is another tool in the toolbox where we're applying Anthem Flex or Zidua where labeled in the fall to help us with some of these resistant weeds. Okay, what I'm going to show you now is Joe Eichley's data where now this applies, this study was done with water hemp, but I think it applies to not only water hemp, but also kochia and any other weed. So what he did was he took all his data from 2019 to 2023, where they evaluated 3 to 4 inch tall water hemp, had 510 data points where they evaluated water hemp control, and he looked at water hemp control where there was a post-emergence herbicide alone or following a pre. He had Liberty at 32 ounces and List, Liberty plus 2,4-D or dicamba. And where he had, this is the data for the post-emergence only. And he presents this as a box and whisker plot. So here we've got glufosinate or Liberty, 2,4-D alone, Liberty 2,4-D, and then dicamba. You can see the wide range in the data here. There's quite a spread in the level of control. So we're seeing not consistent control with the post-only herbicides. So 40 to 100% is the range of Liberty alone. Obviously, There's a lot of factors that go into that, from weed size to weather conditions, etc. An even wider range here with dicamba. So this tells you that dicamba alone post-emergence is not always the answer. But now let's look at where he had a post-emergence application following a pre. So this is avoiding the total post. So we've got a pre, whatever that pre was, and there wasn't just one pre, it was any pre that would have some activity on the water hemp. So you look how tight these levels of control are for each of the herbicides. Again, dicamba probably providing the least control here, and the Liberty plus 2,4-D providing the best control of water hemp. So what I'm saying is I think we can apply the same principle not only to water hemp, but for kochia and other weeds. Okay, so I want to talk now about antagonism of Roundup, and then tank mixing Roundup with other products. Because I hear sometimes growers will say, well, my Roundup didn't work, or my Liberty didn't work, my Gramoxone didn't work. Why? What are some of the reasons for that? But before I get into the tank mixes, I'm going to show you foxtail barley control with Roundup alone, and then I'm going to show you with Roundup with another product. So this is foxtail barley. As you know, this is a perennial. And this is a picture from quite a few years ago where we applied this October 1 of 2012. And then this picture was taken the following May. You can see how effective the glyphosate was by itself compared to the untreated. This was sent to me by a farmer who told me that he had sprayed glyphosate alone in the fall. So you can see his little sprayer. He made one pass with Roundup in the fall to control foxtail barley. Now this is foxtail barley control in the spring. And this is what I learned through experience, where I had sprayed these plants in colder temperatures. It was probably in the 50s when I sprayed this. And then Gary, who works with me, came in the field around this plot right here. So this was in the same field, just maybe, I don't know, 50 yards away from these plants. He came in and sprayed 5 days later when the temperatures were in the, was more around 70, 75. And you can see the level of control by applying Roundup in those warmer temperatures. Okay, now I'm going to compare glyphosate or Roundup alone. Now, this just happened to be in the fall, but I think we would see the same, or I know we would see the same response if applied in the spring. So I am actively promoting metribuzin to be used in soybean, but there's one scenario where we have to be careful, and foxtail barley is one of those, where metribuzin, if applied with glyphosate, can antagonize a perennial weed or a perennial grass like foxtail barley. And maybe to a certain extent, we might see that some on annual grasses. But usually the annual grasses, or a lot of the annual grasses aren't up when we're spraying. Sometimes they can be, but I'm showing you the severe antagonism here with metribuzin with glyphosate on foxtail barley. And here's untreated, and this is glyphosate metribuzin tank mixed, and you can't hardly tell which one's the untreated. So clear antagonism on foxtail barley. Okay, another perennial weed where we see antagonism with glyphosate is on Canada thistle. We see group 14 antagonism. This is sharpened. So this is glyphosate by itself on Canada thistle. about 74% control. Sharpen just burns the leaves off but doesn't control it. And then glyphosate plus sharpen together. Clear antagonism here where the two are applied together 60 days after treatment. This is spring dandelion control with glyphosate and group 14 herbicides. So we've got glyphosate alone around 90% control, tank mix with AIM, Sharpen at a couple rates, Spartan, Spartan Charge, Valor, and then compared to Express and 2,4-D. You can see where we've got the group 14s right in here. We're seeing probably about 30 to 40% less dandelion control with the group 14s. And then Express and 2,4-D here, similar control to the glyphosate. Now this is a spring dandelion control. Compare this with a fall dandelion control with basically the same treatments or similar treatments, and we don't see as the level of antagonism was not the same with the fall. We're really only seeing maybe 10 to 12% difference on a dandelion control with the fall application. Okay, changing gears to should we tank mix gramoxone and Roundup? I'm going to say, based on some of the work we've done, never for perennial weeds. If you're targeting, if a major weed in your field is a perennial, you're going to see clear antagonism on Canada thistle and dandelion. Now, regarding annual weeds, we have seen antagonism on annual weeds was greater under drought stress conditions. If the plants weren't drought stressed, we didn't see near as much antagonism combining gramoxone and Roundup. So the response you're going to see will be species and environment dependent. Should we tank mix Liberty and Roundup? We have observed significantly less antagonism on most perennial and annual weeds compared to gramoxone. So, in the work we did this year, we observed much less antagonism with Liberty and Roundup than I expected. In fact, the antagonism with Liberty was usually no more than 10%, even under drought conditions. And I'll show you some of the data. We know, however, that Liberty, even by itself, isn't very effective under high heat, super high heat, drought stress, and low humidity conditions. Okay, and part of what I based some of the research on was this study from Kansas State, where they were evaluating tall or large crabgrass. We don't have large crabgrass. It's an annual. Well, we don't have it in the fields. We might have it in our lawn. But they evaluated large crabgrass with paraquat or gramoxone, and paraquat by itself 53% control. Glyphosate by itself 99% control. Where they tank mixed glyphosate and paraquat only 58%. So basically, it was like you're spraying paraquat by itself. But notice this one right here. Glyphosate followed by paraquat, 99. So where they separated glyphosate and paraquat by just one day, they were able to overcome the antagonism from paraquat. I found that interesting, that it only took one day of separation to overcome that antagonism. So we went out and looked at this with dandelion. These are sprayed June 26. Pictures taken about a month later. This is gramoxone by itself up here in the top left. And you know that gramoxone by itself is just going to burn off the leaves, and the dandelion, being a perennial, is going to grow back. Then here we've got Roundup and gramoxone together. And you can see a lot of regrowth here with the dandelion. It doesn't look as bad as the gramoxone, but it isn't clean either. But where we separated Roundup followed by gramoxone 1 day later, we're seeing much less antagonism, seeing far fewer dandelion here where they were separated by 1 day. And then up here in the top right, we see the separation of 5 days, much cleaner. So this is why I'm saying if you're targeting perennials, I would not tank mix the two. Okay, so here I'm going to show you another study where we tank mix gramoxone and Roundup and Liberty and Roundup. So let me set the stage here. So on May 12, we applied some herbicides to different weeds, and the conditions on that day, which we may never see again on May 12, it was 93 degrees, 17% humidity, and the weeds were severely drought stressed. Even the kochia was curling because it was drought stressed. Then on May 14 to May 21, we received about 5.34 inches of rain. And then on May 24, I decided to reapply the treatments that we applied on May 12. This time the conditions were 70 degrees and 30% humidity with good soil moisture, actively growing plants, and the plants were not drought stressed. So on May 12, plants were severely drought stressed, 93 degrees, 17% humidity, compared to May 24, 70 and 30. So as I go through these slides, note in the bottom right or bottom left here, this is May 12, 93 degrees, 17% humidity, plants were drought stressed. This is Roundup and gramoxone. This first bar is Roundup by itself at 20 ounces, then gramoxone at 1.67 pints, then a tank mix of Roundup and gramoxone, and then another tank mix of Roundup and gramoxone. We just increased the rate from 20 to 32 ounces to see if a higher rate of Roundup would help overcome the antagonism. And so this is dandelion. So this is 4 weeks after treatment, this evaluation. So dandelion by itself, Roundup by itself, 95%. And then gramoxone, only 20% control. Clear antagonism here with Roundup and gramoxone under this drought stress condition. This is lamb's quarters. Roundup by itself, even under drought stress conditions, 92%. But gramoxone by itself is generally weaker. Gramoxone by itself is generally weaker, and especially in these drought stress conditions, only 55%. Throwing Roundup in the tank increased the level of control a little bit, but not great. Nowhere near the level of Roundup by itself. This is green flower pepperweed, a winter annual mustard, complete control with Roundup, and then very poor control with gramoxone, and still poor control even with Roundup, gramoxone together, clear antagonism. This is kochia. Now with Roundup, this is Roundup resistant kochia, so we don't expect Roundup to control the kochia here. We did see some better control with gramoxone, but adding the Roundup didn't help us any. Okay, now notice the color of blue changed. Now we're going to move to May 24, where we've got 70% 70 degrees, 30% humidity, had plenty of rain. The plants are not drought stressed anymore. This is kochia. Again, Roundup didn't control the Roundup resistant kochia. But the gramoxone treatments now, because the plants are not drought stressed, we have good environmental conditions, the gramoxone worked very well on kochia. This is shepherd's purse. Now, in this case, we did still see some antagonism on shepherd's purse. 99% control with Roundup, but only 75% control where we had gramoxone in the tank. This is green flower pepperweed. Very slight antagonism here. This is flicksweed. Again, very slight antagonism on flicksweed. Okay, now we're going to switch to Roundup Liberty. So Roundup and Liberty together. Now we're going back to May 12 under the drought stress conditions, 93 degrees, 70% humidity. Roundup alone on dandelion looked very good. Liberty alone, only 50% control. But where we tank mix Roundup and Liberty, there is only very slight antagonism here with the Liberty. So I found this interesting that even under the drought stress condition, there wasn't much antagonism, maybe 10%, 5 to 10% antagonism between Roundup and Liberty. This is lamb's quarters. 92% control with Roundup by itself. Liberty under drought stress conditions does not work very well. Liberty doesn't like 17% humidity. It likes 30 to 40% humidity at least. So, and Liberty is weaker on lamb's quarters, and it definitely shows here. But where we throw in the Roundup, we raise that level of control, even under drought stress conditions. This is green flower pepperweed. Similar. Roundup alone looks great. Liberty alone under the drought stress condition doesn't look good, but put the two together, still works quite well. This is kochia. Obviously Roundup isn't going to control the Roundup resistant kochia. Liberty didn't control it either because of the conditions. And then throwing Roundup in the tank helped a little bit, but not much. Okay, now we move to May 24, where we don't have drought stress. We got 70 degrees, 30% relative humidity. This is kochia. Now, where Liberty didn't work under the drought stress conditions, it looked very good here, where we've got much better conditions. Look good. Liberty looked good alone or with Roundup. This is shepherd's purse. All treatments looked very good. No antagonism there. This is green flower pepperweed, which can be a tough weed, I found out. So Roundup alone looked good. Liberty only about 82%, but throwing in the Roundup with it looked better. This is flicksweed. All treatments look good under these non-drought stress conditions. Okay, to summarize then, the conditions that appear to affect gramoxone and Liberty: temperature extremes. We probably, these herbicides aren't going to work as well in 40 to 55 degrees in colder temperatures, and they aren't going to like the drought stress conditions we typically find when it's greater than 90. They don't work as well in low humidity. They're going to prefer 30 to 40% humidity. Drought stress plants aren't actively growing. They're not going to be controlled as well with these herbicides. And then also larger weeds. If we can spray ideally smaller weeds, the better. Okay, that's all I have for now. I'll open up to any questions you might have.